Hello and welcome back to New Game, New Week. I'm going to be playing what many of you already know, based on what you can see here. But what you might not know is this is not actually real WoW. As you can see by the plethora of classes along the bottom, this is a WoW private server. Fret not, I'm poor. So I can't really afford to play normal WoW. Not that I want to. It's kind of gotten a little messy in recent years, but regardless, I'm just going to give a small little rundown on Ascension WoW. At least their up-and-coming new server that might be releasing sometime in the fall this year. So, let's get right into it. There are, as you can see, 21 classes, I believe this is. And we will just start to describe a few of them, in case any of you do have interest in playing. So, of course, the races are, whatever. It's classic races. Plus BC. Right. So first off, we have Necromancer. And in Necromancer, you have 3 specializations. Death, which is centered around diseasing and otherwise debilitating their foes. With dots, it plays very similarly to Affliction Warlock in a way. Then you have Rime, which is like a frost mage. A lot of your attacks are very bursty, but they do slow. They slow, they stun, they root, etc. Then you have animation, like the signature Necromancer. The signature Necromancer ability. I don't know. You summon undead. You can summon lots of small undead, a few bigger undead. You can summon mages, archers, I think. You can summon giant rot machines. It's interesting. I have personally never played one myself, but it has a. I'm interested in playing one. Not that I've actually gotten to play one yet. So then there's Pyromancer, which, as you can assume, has some relation to fire. So similarly to Necromancer, you have your first spec, which is a burn spec. Everything you have just does a lot of burn damage. You have like 400 different dots that you apply to things, and it just keeps on ticking and ticking and ticking and ticking. Then you have Flame Weaving, which is actually a healing-based build, where you cauterize your allies' wounds. You still do have some offensive skills. I believe some of your abilities are kind of like Discipline Priest, where whenever you deal damage to an enemy, you also heal an ally. And then you have Draconic, which is essentially just one of the new races in WoW, the Drakir. You turn into a Drakir, and then you just breathe fire on people. It's neat. Let's see. We have Cultist, which is like your more Cthulhu-based class. It has 4 specs, sort of like Druid. You have 1 melee DPS, which is called, I think Godblade? No, Heretic. I don't know the exact names, because Cultist is not a class I played. We have a melee DPS, which is something. You have a caster DPS. Then you have a tank and a healer. I mean, it can do everything. Although, the healing, which is the Heretic, is a melee-based healer, kind of like a war priest, where you do hit people in melee and heal them. It's very interesting, though something I want to play, but haven't gotten the time to. Then we have Starcaller here, which is one of the more unique classes. It is a plate-wearing 4-spec class. Melee, ranged, tank, and healer, just like Cultist. But you wear mostly plate and int-based armor. So you have Sentinel, which is like your traditional... if you ever played in the Night Elf starting zone, you'll eventually reach, like... Oh, God, I can't remember her name. You'll reach a set of NPCs that are... They throw, like, warglaives, and that's kind of, like, the theme of this class, is like where it came from. But Sentinel, you use a bow, and you pinprick them with arrows and shoot down waves of starlight. It's very interesting. Then you have Warden, which is, like, your traditional, like, Medivh is her name in WoW. You throw knives everywhere, you arc moon blades, and... Very interesting. You're very tanky, you're very mobile, and you do have a good amount of self-healing in Warden. Every time you crit, you get an instant cast of one of your other heals. Then we have Moon Priest, which is kind of a combination of Sentinel and Warden to a degree. But you use your bow to attack people, kind of like a Discipline Priest, and you heal them. Then you have like an additional mechanic, which is based off the moon. Obviously, it's Starcaller, moon, whatever. You have some channels, but most of the time, most of your healing is going to be from dealing damage or instant casts. And then finally, we have my favorite spec within the class, is the tank spec, Moonguard, unrelated to the server, where you convert your mana into various defensive abilities. Depending on how much mana you have at every point in time, gives you varying buffs. You know, the more mana you want, more mana than not. For instance, their level 10 passive, when you unlock specializations, is called Asteroid Belt, and in Asteroid Belt you get a parry, block, and block value buff dependent on how much mana you have at the time of that buff recasting itself, because it's only like a 10 or 15 second timer. Other than that, I mean, it's a block, parry, evade tank or dodge. It's pretty competitive in both rating, Mythic Plus, and all sorts of things. It's very fun, but it does wear plate armor and have int as its main stat, as all of these do. I think Moon Priest is the only one that doesn't wear mail or plate. It wears mail because that's just what more healer gear is mail than plate. Of course, Paladin, Holy Paladin has some healing plate gear, but it's not the same. Then finally on to Sun Cleric. Sun Cleric is like your more traditional paladin. It has 4 specs: melee damage, caster, tank, and healer. You have Piety, which is the name of their caster spec, which I believe plays kind of like a fire mage in like traditional WoW. You're very bursty. I can't really say much. It's one of the ones that I haven't played. Then you have Blessings, which is the healer, and it is a kind of mix between Shaman and Holy Paladin from retail. You're very, very strong in single target situations, but once you start getting into larger groups like raids, your healing does dwindle a bit. It's very interesting. You have lots of small bubbles, but you can only apply them to one target at a time. Every time you heal somebody, their HP goes up by a small amount. It's interesting. Now, on to Valkyrie, which is the melee archetype of Sun Cleric. Valkyrie is very similar. Valkyrie is if Ret Paladin and Fury Warrior had a baby. You swing two-handed hammers, or swords, or whatever, each imbued with the power of the sun and holy energy. It's extremely satisfying, even if a little clunky at times. It's an amazing power fantasy. and it's incredibly fun. Seraphim, tank spec, blah blah blah. Is very similar to retail Prat Paladin in the way that you do have a lot of block and a lot of parry, as traditional for tanks, at least that have shields. But your healing is also your tankiness is also comes from healing. You have a certain, you have a little bit of bubble, self bubbles that you can cast, or that get cast on you as you do your normal rotation. And you get, similarly to Starcaller's Warden, you have, a few instant cast proc abilities that when a certain condition is met, you can instantly cast an ability. Sun Cleric is probably the most refined class in the entire game so far. Let's move on to Tinker. Tinker kind of doesn't fit among a lot of these other classes. Kind of in the same way that gnomes and goblins don't really fit in retail. They're very mechanical based. But in Tinker, you have 3 specs, 1 melee, 1 ranged, and 1 healer. Mechanic, which is their melee spec, it's all about summoning, or rather creating, machines to help you in combat. Furthermore, you eventually unlock the ability to enter a mech suit, which then increases your melee damage and makes you a little bit tankier, because you are a very squishy class that is trying to play in melee. Not one I've really played a lot, but then you have Invention, which is healing people with nanobots or armor repair abilities. They can restore energy and mana and various other class resources. Very interesting playstyle. I've played a little bit of it. You do get a gun as a mechanic, and you have like 3 or 4 different kinds of guns. You have like your traditional rifle, you have a shotgun, and then I think you have a smaller either pistol or minigun. I don't know. I haven't gotten very far into the class, but as a healer, you get to put healing bullets into said gun. If you're using the rifle, the heals heal for a lot, and the heals, they're pretty powerful. If you use a shotgun, it's an AoE heal, obviously, it hits multiple targets. And then the third one, I think it's smaller, but it has a lower cost or something. I'm not entirely sure. And then Demolition. You are all about throwing bombs, rockets, and shooting your gun. Your guns do more damage, they reload faster, etc., etc. You have a little rocket jump that you can place like a little bomb on the ground. If you stand over it and detonate it, it can launch you dozens of feet into the air. Incredibly fun for both combat. Oh, and it also knocks back enemies and allies, which don't use it in confined spaces. I will tell you that, because it can be very detrimental to certain things. It can sometimes push you through walls. I'm sure that will get fixed when the game gets fully released. But either way, fun class. Now on to Runemaster, which is probably the most contrary class to what its archetype, like the thought you might have of it. But Runemaster, 3 specs, 2 of which are melee damage dealing specs, and 1 of which is a caster, though not really a caster. So first off, we have Engravement, which is a dual wielding spec that is very mobile, has several smaller teleports, but Engravement, you focus on engraving your weapon with small runes, which have various buffs. They can increase your attack speed, they can increase your attack damage, they can give you armor pen, a slight anti-heal on hit, various different effects, and of course you can put 1 on each weapon. You can't double up. And then you have other abilities and things that do additional buffs or debuffs, depending on what engravements you have. Interesting spec. Kind of plays like an enhancement shaman, though a lot less castery. A lot less things to cast upon yourself. And then next we have Glyphic, which is the ranged spec, which I've not gotten a chance to play, but as far as I'm aware, your whole job is to generate glyphic energy and then unleash it upon your enemies. Interestingly, it is a spirit-based offensive class or spec. Your main stat is spirit. You know, the one that usually restores your mana over every 5 seconds. It's interesting. They have different scalings from other classes. It's weird. It's weird. And then finally, for Riftblade, or Runemaster, we have Riftblade, which is a rogue that's highly mobile, but you have a giant two-handed sword. It's a very interesting class fantasy. The whole spec has, you know, the similar glyphs or engravings from earlier as a core part of the class, regardless of what spec you choose. And they also have varying effects. Its abilities also have varying effects depending on what glyph you're in, or rune, whichever it is. And you focus around, I think, 4 or 5 stronger abilities. It's not my cup of tea. I very much liked what it was before, but it is not horrible. It just feels like a pale comparison. But Primalist, onto our third, or rather fourth, 4-spec class with a melee, caster, tank, and healer. Although this one, while also wearing plates, as all 4 of the other ones did, has actually a second option for the caster, I believe, wants to use cloth armor. So you have life, which is, again, very similar to like a war priest style, where you want to be up and in people's faces to deal damage and to heal. It's very... You don't have a lot of casts. You do immediate damage for immediate healing. You do a few hots, a few bubbles, but for the large majority of things, you hit somebody, it heals a nearby ally. Very short, very simple, very fun. Wild Walker, which I believe is one of 3 classes that has a mainstay pet. It plays kind of like a survival hunter. You want to be melee, and you want to be in the fray. It has, you know, an AoE stance, not AoE stance, but AoE set of skills versus a melee, a single target one. Very weird, very interesting. Finally, on to Mountain King, which is their tank stance. You are an earth-based tank. You shroud yourself with various slates of rock and stone, and I think you dual wield in this spec, which is very interesting for a tank. I think the only tank in retail that dual wields is Brewmaster, or can dual wield rather. And I technically Druid can too, but Druid doesn't really, you know, you turn into a bear. What's in your hands doesn't really matter at that point, but you have a very weird mechanic, is that you have to both simultaneously keep up and keep down a stack system. So every time you take a certain amount of damage, you gain a stack, or it removes a stack. And then every few abilities you cast gains a stack or removes a stack. I don't remember the exact rate or order. And if you reach too many or too little, it stuns you for a few seconds, and you get a brief DR buff, if I recall. Very interesting. As you can see, a lot of these classes are interesting, as I've said it a lot. But they are. They are very non-traditional, at least in the context of WoW. But Geomancer, kind of like Toph from Uh, Avatar: The Last Airbender, couldn't find the name there. Where you just pick up rocks, you throw them at people, and everything's good. It's very fun, very thematic. I don't know how it performs, but this is still an alpha, so things change on the daily. Then we have Reaper, which has 2 melee specs and 1 tank spec. You have Soul, which is your dual-wielding, stealth-based spec. And I guess I should have said this before I got into the specs, but all the classes, or all the specs in this class, have some kind of lifesteal. That's like the main shtick of Reaper. So, Soul, which is their dual-wielding rogue, hits from stealth and has a few self-heals, I think based on the amount of damage they took in a certain amount of time, or how much damage they dealt in a certain amount of time. It's weird. It's interesting. Then you have Harvest, which is your 2-handed version. You don't want to go stealth, and you want to wear plate armor. Kind of plays like old blood DK, where you did not, where you were not a tank, but you did have a lot of self-healing. Very old period of time, if anyone remembers that. Finally, Domination. Fortify yourself with the souls of enemies to deflect powerful attacks. It's just kind of Harvest. It's kind of more like actual blood DK in retail, where you're a big beefy guy with a 2-handed sword and you lifesteal. Very interesting. Very interesting. Venomancer, which is similar to Druid in a way, where you have 4 forms, not including your human form or humanoid form. And as you can expect, Veno, which is Venom, the entire class deals with interacting with Venom in some way or another. So you have Fortitude, which is your tank stance. You turn into a Scorpion, focusing on HP, healing, and DR, as opposed to blocking, parrying, or dodging, as other tanks might. And then you lace people with poisons and venoms, which some of them restore your HP when you hit them. Some of them restore your allies, I think. Some of them reduce the damage. Some of them just do damage. And so on. If you want to turn into a giant scorpion, this is what you want to play. But the next spec, which is the melee spec, is Stalking, or Stalker. You turn into a giant Black Widow spider, and you do a lot of poison damage from stealth. It's nothing other than just cat druid without combo points that turns into a spider instead of a giant cat. I mean, there's nothing else to say about that. Rotweaver is basically just Boomkin, but more dot based. So if Boomkin and Affliction Warlock had a baby, then you have Vizier, which is one of the more interesting classes or specs in the game. Your entire kit focuses around 1 or 2 abilities. I can't remember the name of the ability, but it's something along the lines of Blessings of Shadra, as it says there. And it applies a dot to a target, which is a very small dot, but it's a very long dot. And then at the end of the dot, it gives you a sizable bubble. So the entire kit revolves around consuming a set duration of this dot to give other effects. And then, you have other effects which increase the length of the dot, either passively or adding duration manually. So you can consume 10 or 15 seconds of the dot to apply a stronger bubble to a target, or apply a stronger hot to a target. And then, of course, even if you consume all the duration with other abilities, it still gives you the innate feature of applying a small bubble at the end of its life. It is one of the most interesting classes that I have played so far. And it does have some rage base. Very weird to have a rage-based healer. Alright, now on to Chronomancer, another very rule-breaking class here. You have 3 specs. One is a ranged damage dealer, one is a caster, and the other is a healer. So, starting with the casting damage spec, you have duality. Rampant chaos and order flow through you. Lean towards one with the purpose of unmaking your enemies. So, this is a very... This could be 2 specs with how it's made, but you have order and chaos. Order, I believe, is a very heavy single target dot-based build. Or not build, but lean. Kind of like how Boomkin could lean towards the sun or the moon to favor their solar or lunar things. Duality has chaos being very heavy single target, or chaos is very heavy AoE, and order is very heavy single target. You can slow enemies, you can speed up allies, etc., and very weird. Then you have displacement, which is the healer spec. You can still, as well, slow enemies and speed up allies and teleport around the battlefield and shift the sands of time, as it is with the class, to do various different things. I've not gotten a huge chance to play the class in general, especially the healer. But there's not a single class in this entire game that I am not somewhat interested in. So finally, we have Artificer here, which uses wands. So very similarly to Arcane Wizard or Arcane Mage in retail, where you have your missile barrage, your entire shtick based around casting spells, which then empower your missile attacks, your wand attacks, and then you just pepper them off between casts. And it's an interesting playstyle, for sure, for certain. But now on to the Bloodmage, which they recently changed the name of. It used to be called Son of Argul, which, for those of you that know anything of WoW lore, this is the origin of Worgens. Argul is the god of Worgens. I don't exactly remember which. Or at least he was the original Worgen. Anyways, another 4-spec class, although this one uses leather instead of plate like the first 4, or mail like the last 5th. So you have Flesh Weaver, which is very traditional vampire. Actually, by turning this into Blood Mage, they shifted it from explicitly Worgen flavored to both werewolf and vampire. Very interesting. The Flesh Weaver is your vampire healer spec. Your entire shtick is sucking the blood out of your enemies and, putting it into your allies. Very disgusting, but very interesting. And several of your abilities cost your own life, actually, as well as sucking from your enemies. Then you have Sanguine, which is a caster spec, where you still spend your own life to deal damage to your enemies. But instead of healing your allies with your enemy's blood, you siphon it for yourself, which can heal you, but it can also empower you further, which then lets you do more damage and empower further, and etc., etc. A vicious cycle of blood. Very weird. Then you have a Cursed, which is your rogue E, melee, and ranged based Worgen spec. My least played of all of the classes, or least known of all the specs. Then you have Eternal, which is you turn into a hulking Worgen. That's like 2 or 3 times the size of the other Worgen. And you have lots of DR, lots of incoming healing, lots of effective HP, few bubbles. It is very interesting, and it plays very similar to Bear Druid from retail. You're just a big hulk of meat. You dodge a lot. You are dual wielding, I think, in this pack, or it prefers you to dual wield. You have AoE slashes and claws that cause enemies to bleed. You have various bites. Some of the bites cause you to heal. You know, as expected. I mean, you're a giant Worgen. You're angry. And you do summon bats, shadow bats. They used to be Shadow Worgen. The spec used to be called Pack Leader, but they kind of moved away from that, and I'm kind of sad. It was a very cool thematic, but whatever. Then we have Guardian, which is the first support class that we have seen. So it has 3 specs: melee, tank, and support, which is something that WoW generally does not have. This has a 4th to the Trinity, which is generally in the middle. You're kind of tanky, or you kind of have a lot of healing, or you have a lot of damage, a little bit of all 3. So first off, we have Gladiator. Firstly, the entire class uses a shield. You have a shield and a one-hander, and that is what all the classes get, along with plate armor. It is your traditional knight-esque feel. So Guardian, or Gladiator specifically, is, Gladiator, where you're like a Spartan. You kick people, you stab people with ideally a spear. I mean, it doesn't have to be a spear. You cause some bleeds, you can run and jump, and CC people. It's a very sticky class in PvP, because you have, good amount of mobility, you have a good amount of CC, and you are still wearing full plate and a shield, so you are still absurdly tanky. And then you still do get the tools that the tank spec of this class has, to some degree. And then on to Inspiration, the support class, where you sing and place down banners, and you inspire your allies to various feats of strength. You still do a decent chunk of damage, not really comparable to an actual DPS spec, but more than a tank or healer would in most cases. And you have incoming healing buffs, you have damage reduction buffs, you have crit buffs, haste buffs, all sorts of things. Your entire job is just to make people vibe, and it is a very fun experience. Although it doesn't have much use outside of raids, because in most mythic runs they would much rather have either a full healer or a full DPS. I mean, there are some cases where that might not be the case. Like if you were a very melee heavy group, you might want a Guardian to have more melee heavy buffs, because they are a melee class. And then onto Vanguard, which is a brick wall of a class. It is your traditional DR tank. You reduce damage, you reduce damage, you reduce damage. You have a very high block value, a very high block chance, but your parry and evade, effectively nothing. Almost all of your abilities are reliant around your shield. And you get something, I think, called Dawnbreaker or something, or Guardbreaker. I forget the name. But anytime you block an attack, you immediately deal AoE damage in an area. It's a small amount, but with your block chance being over 50% in the end game, unbuffed, apparently, you block a lot, which makes you very effective against low damage attacks, because you're blocking both a lot in quantity and in quality. Although the class itself does not have almost any self-healing, which makes its solo ability a little lackluster unless you are really that much stronger than all of your opponents. But onto Stormbringer, where you have 3 specs, 2 of which are casters, and 1 of which is support. You have Maelstrom, which is like over water kind of deal, obviously, Maelstrom, where you weave lightning and water attacks together to electrocute your enemies, and it has some CC, but that's not the support. Then you have Lightning, which is big, bursty, fast attacks, which you can do on the move. Really punchy, really bursty. You summon lightning attacks, you summon lightning clouds, you summon just chain lightning, chain lightning, chain lightning. If anyone here has ever played Lord of the Rings Online, one of my favorite MMOs, it is kind of similar to Lightning RK, Yellow RK, as it's called in that game. Very fun, very bursty, very mobile. But onto the support spec, Wind. You conjure a giant air elemental and create gusts of winds. Which... it's very interesting. While it is a support class, it does still have a very heavy focus on damage as opposed to healing or whatnot. It still does have some heals. It still does have some general utility, but it is still very much a damage buff class. It has a similar skill to Bloodlust from Shaman, where you just increase everyone's haste and their spell damage, and can't really speak much on it. Then we have Felsworn, melee, caster, and tank, which is very interesting. This is, I think, the only class that I have never played outside of Necromancer. But it plays, as far as I've been told, very similarly to the one in retail. But it's very AoE centric, of course, other than the casting one, which I, again, can't really speak on, so I'll just read the descriptions. Slaying, which I'm assuming is your melee, where you chain your weapon combos attack and specific weapon combo attacks in specific orders to unleash powerful effects. And you have Infernal, which I'm assuming is the caster. You wield powerful fel magics and cast spells to obliterate enemies from afar. And you have Tyrant, which is your powerful tank infused with fel energy, focused on self-sustain and AoE damage. Again, I don't really know anything on the class. It's literally just the same class as in retail, except I think Draenei and Orc can play it. Or better or worse. Then we have Barbarian, which is your traditional Unga Bunga. I wield a big weapon, I swing it around, I hit people really hard. So, melee, ranged, and support. Which you might be thinking, no tank? I agree. There should be a tank spec. If anyone from the team is watching this video, please, I clasp my hands and get on my knees for a tank spec. We don't need Headhunter that badly. But, let's get into it. So, you have Brutality, which is your traditional rah-rah two-handed barbarian. You spin in giant circles, you apply bleeds, you yell at people, you demoralize them. Bruh, it's everything you can think about a barbarian, that is what they are. Then you have Headhunter, which is very interesting. You take either axes or spears, throwing axes or spears, and you chuck them at people from afar. You have lots of dots, I think. You have lots of debuffs from incoming healing and slows, so that you can kite. You have movement speed buffs. You have some slight AoE group healing that also applies a little bit of damage buff. Which I think everyone gets that, but specifically Headhunting gets a little bit more. Then you have Ancestry, which is probably the most interesting of all. Your entire class is based around drinking, but not in the way that Brewmaster is from retail. So your entire job is to fill and empty your beer stein, whatever it's called. And they have various effects. Some of them can increase all of your allies' damage by adding frost damage onto all of their attacks. Some of them is similarly to retail with Brewmaster. You can throw down a keg and breathe ice fire effect, essentially. You can heal people by throwing mugs of ale at them. So many various things, but it is still a support, so you make people tankier, you heal them, and you still do some damage. And it is the only spec for Barbarian that is allowed to use a shield. Now onto Witch Doctor, which is very what you'd expect. It is very bleed based. You have heals, you have debuffs, etc. So you have range damage, casting damage, and healer. Shadow hunting is the least archetypal version. So you equip a ranged weapon, a bow, or a gun. I think you can use a gun. And you release shadow bolts, which you can apply small dots. You can deal more bursty damage. You have a good amount of mobility. One of your mobility is you mark a location, kind of like Warlock can, and then at a set time, or if you reactivate it, you can return to that location. And then eventually, I believe you get the ability to return from that location to your prior location from when you had cast the ability before. Very interesting. Then you have Voodoo, which is you apply debuff, you apply dots, and very archetypal. Then Brewing, the healing spec. You combine various different ingredients, which all have very unique effects, and you throw potions at people and heal them. And then you cast some spells at them, wiggle your fingers and all voodoo witch magic like. But you have a large pool of ingredients that you can apply, that you can pull from. Some of them increase like shadow resistance, I believe. Some of them increase incoming healing. Some of them might increase a little bit of damage. But you can mix and match them. And now on to one of my favorite classes, Witch Hunter, which is like your... anyone remembers the Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter? I mean, you're a Vampire Hunter through and through. 4 specs, 1 melee, 2 ranged, and 1 tank. You have Bolt Slinger, where you dash around and you fire hand crossbow bolts, or not. You can fire a normal crossbow at a fast pace towards enemies. Very mobile, very poppy. If you ever play League of Legends, this is basically just Vayne, or this is like Blade, who dashes around and rolls on the ground, and etc. Darkness, which is the most hunter-like spec in the game, aside from Primalist's Windwalker. So you get a Shadowhound, or maybe multiple Shadowhounds, and you shoot with a gun. Think to the Worgen starting zone, where people have Mastiffs and a gun. That kind of feel. But you have shadows in it, and some of them knock back, some of them root, your traditional tools. Then you have Inquisition, which is all about fiery focus and purity and wickedness. You have 2 energy pools, essentially, even though they're not energy. You have two things that you have to balance. If you have a high purity, you can then slash at an enemy to do a little bit more damage, or high wickedness, you might have a higher crit. I don't remember the exact specifics, but you two small weapons, you attack really fast. I don't think there's any stealth mechanics, but you still have a lot of the mobility of the class. And then Black Knight, the least expected of the 3 of the class, where you don a 2-hander instead of ranged weapons to avoid attacks. You are a parry, lifesteal, damage tank. You have lots of AoE from cleaves, from shadowy effects, and then you also have like Witcher tonics that you can drink to give you various effects. Some of them reduce damage taken, some of them just heal you. I think all of them just heal you, but one of them in specific is very punchy heal. It's like 40% of your HP. Very fun. I think this is one of the classes that I'm probably going to end up playing again in this playthrough. Then we have Knight of Xoroth, which is your Death Knight equivalent. 3 specs. And I think this is wrong, specifically, where it says 1 melee damage dealer and 1 tank. There's 3 specs, and I know one of them is more caster focused. I don't know which. I believe it's Hellfire right there, yeah. So, you wear plate, you summon demons, you conjure fire. That's the general class. But then Hellfire, you use more spells, and I'm assuming it's more AoE based. Yeah, upon groups of enemies, there you are. Defiance, which is the tank, you summon demons last second in between yourself and attack, and use them as cannon fodder, taking damage for both yourself and allies. A very interesting idea. And then War is more traditional Barbarian-esque, where you're just, I have as big of a weapon as I can wield, and I swing it around as violently as I can, and deal as much damage as possible. And then, of course, you know, the hatred of the Hells in combination with just the sheer hatred that a Barbarian would usually have. And then we have what used to be called Monk. It's now called Templar. Templar is a combo-based class, but not quite in the way of Rogue. It's more so you have several smaller abilities, and say one of them increases the crit of one of your other abilities, one of them increases just the raw damage, and another one increases the max number of targets. And you can mix and match these up to 3. So I can either have 3 crit, 3 damage, or 3 extra targets, or I can have 1 crit, 1 damage, 1 extra target. And then your combo spenders have all various different effects. And yeah, so your tank stance, which is very similar to Brewmaster Monk in a way. You are very mobile, you stagger damage, and you wield a giant stick. And you have, instead of tonics or brews like Brewmaster does, you have tithes and another word. I can't remember the exact. A librum. There it is. A librum, which is eventually just a fancy religious book, usually. These books do various things. They can cleanse your stagger if you spec into that. They can increase your damage on hit. They can reduce your damage taken. There's a few other ones that make you heal allies nearby every time you perform a combo, on top of other things. Then you have Zealot, which is more about getting dozens of combos off every few seconds, essentially. Very quick, very fast-paced. Then you have Crusader, which is spin to win. Like, almost nothing else to really say on that. You spin, and you spin, and you spin. Obviously, there's other things, but spinning is like the main deal of the class, as far as I'm aware. So, Garen from League of Legends, or Darius. They're both fairly good analogies, where one of their main features is simply to spin. And then last, but most certainly not least, is Ranger. The third class to have a support spec, or fourth. Third? Fourth. You have a melee spec, a range spec, and your support spec, as I said. So the entire point of Archer is to build archery points and spend them. So very similar to rogue combo points. And then you have quivers, which quivers can either add poison hit, which is a little bleed, and a fire, which is just a little bit of fire damage. And then you have a many shot quiver, which makes a few of your attacks hit multiple people. And then your archery, of course, is about various punchy attacks at range. It's just, you know, your normal hunter, except without a pet. You have no pets. Then you have Brigand, which is your more traditional rogue. It is the only actual rogue archetype in the entire game. You dual wield, you poison, you can teleport behind people. It's rogue. There's nothing else to say on that. Even though they're still called archery points, even when you're a Brigand, it's still just a rogue. Then you have Farstrider, which is the support class, which is very interesting. It has mostly the same as archery, but it has a little bit of Brigand, as well as a interesting new mechanic with War Falcons that just repeatedly attack things, attack your targets. And these things can reduce their armor, can increase your damage directly, they can reduce the cooldowns of your abilities, all sorts of weird things. And then combined with that, you have buffs called Warhorns. These Warhorns are your more traditional buffs: 5% haste, 5% damage, 5% crit. And then you have a few weird things like 30% cost reduction on spells, which affects both rage, energy, and mana, and all sorts of various things. And then you have anytime your allies deal damage, it has a chance to heal everyone in the raid for a very small amount, which in parties, this doesn't really happen as much, so you can't raid, you can't be a dedicated healer, but if your party is very good at DPS and doesn't spend a lot of time in raids, or you have someone like, say, a Sun Cleric as your main tank who has a lot of self heals, you can get away with not needing a healer in some cases, especially while leveling. But additionally, your Warhawks also count as allies for these auto attacks. So each time your Warhawks attack, which they might only attack like 10 times, but like a 20 or 30% chance every time they attack over the course of their life, that's pretty likely still, I think. Then, of course, when you're in raids, you have up to 24 people all attacking. That's 24 chances every single time, and it works on ability, on auto attacks, on spells. It's absolutely absurd, and one of my favorite classes. But that is the end of our class overview, and I'm probably just going to end it here, actually, because we've already been about an hour, and this is a very fun game. Currently, it costs money, I will warn, but it will be releasing sometime soon, before the end of the year. They said it would be releasing on the 27th of last month in a few earlier interviews or mentions, but a little bit of setback. It is still both an alpha, but I hope this helps you a little bit. I will be going into a bit more finer of detail, perhaps in the future, with smaller, shorter videos for each of the classes. But this is a very good starter beginner interview, and if you want to see me play this game, please tell me down below. Subscribe, comment, yell at me, tell me you hate me, tell me you hate WoW, anything you want to say. I'm very likely going to be making a small series on this game. Probably won't be anything big, but I will probably have 1 or 2 leveling series. Probably just landscape, but we'll see how it goes. But I will be signing off here. Make sure to comment, like, subscribe, and all that. So, bye-bye.